Fans use various methods to get closer to their favorite musicians. They wait for days in lines at concert halls, sneak into dressing rooms, run out onto the stage, and those rich enough can make arrangements for a private concert. However, sometimes the arrival of an artist at a private party could turn out to be a surprise not only for the man of the hour, but for the artist as well. For example, the most famous gangster in American history received a performance from a well-known musician, much to the surprise of the musician himself. In this episode of the Infographics show, we'll tell you the story of the most extreme concert ever performed by Fats Waller, a renowned jazz musician who was kidnapped as a present for the legendary mafioso Al Capone. For decades now, the name Al Capone has been surrounded by murders and speculation, great fortunes, women, illicit dealings, blackmail, murder, but his biography has found a place not only among criminals, but among scholars as well. There are so many benign stories that many historians doubt their authenticity. One of these disputed tales is the story of the kidnapping of the jazz musician Fats Waller. The heroes of our story were born 5 years apart in New York during an uneasy time, at the beginning of the 20th century. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, or simply Al Capone, was born in 1899. The future world-renowned jazz artist Thomas Wright Fats Waller was born in 1904. While Capone rose to prominence in the criminal underworld, Waller was finding his place in the world of music. At that time, both of these goals were quite difficult to accomplish. Fats was a black child from a family of modest means. Along with Fats, his parents had 10 other children. Because of their difficult living conditions, only 5 of them, including Fats, reached adulthood. His mother was a musician, and with her help, young Waller learned how to play the forte piano by the age of 6. By age 10, he was already confidently performing in his father's church, playing the organ while his father gave sermons. By age 15, Fats was playing the piano practically at a professional level. Around this time, he began to work as a pianist in the theaters and cabarets of New York. Waller gained experience from the virtuoso James Johnson, his future colleague. Johnson helped him master the jazz techniques that increased his popularity. In 1922, the 18-year-old Fats Waller wrote and recorded 2 of his own compositions in the OK Records label's professional studio in the still-developing New York City. 2 years later, in 1924, one of Fats's jazz compositions was broadcast to a wide audience, and it quickly became a fan favorite. His composition, Squeeze Me, continues to be popular among jazz fans nearly a century later. Waller's career took off in the 1920s. The young performer quickly earned the adoration of the public, in part because his performances were so much more than piano music. He completely gave himself to the performance. Fats sang his own songs and used his talents as an actor and comedian, thereby turning his concerts into real shows and transforming himself into a unique artist. Waller soon began performing much more frequently in New York and other cities across the US. He rapidly gained popularity among various groups of people. Even some mafia heads counted themselves among his fans. By the 1920s, the young Capone had already managed to provide for his family and take his first steps into the mafia underworld. As a minor, he was involved with the New York criminal community, mostly engaging in petty crimes. After his marriage in 1918, the future gangster decided to lead a law-abiding life. He moved with his young wife and son to Baltimore and took up work as an accountant in a counting house. However, in 1920, Capone's former boss and head of a mafia group, Johnny Torrio, offered Capone a position as his helper if he moved to Chicago. It was an offer Capone couldn't refuse. By moving his family to Chicago, Capone became consciously immersed in the illegal dealings of his boss's business in various regards. Torrio made enormous amounts of money by controlling a considerable portion of the gambling scene, as well as prostitution and bootlegging, the underground trade of alcohol in Chicago. Fearing for the future safety of their business, the mafia gradually began to exert influence over local politicians and officials, often in a less than humanitarian fashion. Along with Torrio's other people, Capone participated in blackmailing victims and even in murder. In 1925, after one of the attempts on his life, Johnny Torrio decided to return to Italy. He gave complete power over his illicit business to his most trusted helper, Al Capone. In that moment, Capone began his career as one of the most famous gangsters of the 20th century. Unlike his predecessor, Capone was not prepared to lead a quiet and unremarkable life in order to avoid attracting the attention of the authorities. He preferred to live a life of luxury, and he took every penny of the millions he earned from under-the-table dealings. For instance, he transformed his office, the Metropole Hotel, into one of the most fashionable hotels in Chicago. Sometime later, he became the owner of another hotel called the Hawthorne. He also owned many expensive cars and valuables, and generally exhibited the markings of a wealthy life. In January 1927, Capone celebrated his 28th birthday. The party was extravagant. Historians estimate that Capone's income at the time was roughly $100 million per year. His appetite for spending kept pace with his ill-gotten gains, all the more so on his birthday. In an unbelievable confluence of circumstances, Fats Waller arrived in Chicago on the very day of Capone's party. The musician, at the peak of his popularity, was visiting the city on tour. He gave a concert that evening in the Sherman Hotel. As always, Waller dazzled the public with his performance, took a bow, and prepared to retire for the evening. But just as Fats was leaving the hotel, he found himself at the wrong end of a pistol. A group of 4 men stopped the terrified musician and ordered him to get in their car. Having no alternative, Waller complied and set off with his kidnappers toward an undisclosed location. Sometime later, the car stopped. The same group of 4 men led Fats into a different hotel, still threatening him with a pistol. Inside, to Fats' amazement, he found a lavish party taking place. What happened next shocked the musician even more. The kidnappers led him to a forte piano and ordered him to start playing. As soon as Waller sat behind the instrument, they stopped threatening him with the gun. Gradually recovering from the shock of the situation, Fats took a look around and began to understand what was going on. Some claim that the musician only heard Al Capone's voice and laughter, while others say that he saw the mafia boss with his own eyes. However, it actually happened. Waller suddenly realized that he was at the party of Al Capone himself, the biggest gangster in America. But the most surprising thing was that no one was preparing to kill him. Capone's men knew how much their boss loved Waller's music, so they decided to give their boss an unusual birthday present, a concert by his favorite musician. But they weren't about to make prior arrangements. Once he figured out what was going on, Fats began a musical marathon. According to the description in the biography written by his son Maurice in 1977, aptly titled Fats Waller, the pianist played a few days in a row. During that entire time, he hardly left the forte piano. However, the mafia didn't intend to allow their guest of honor to tire from hunger or thirst. Al Capone's people arranged everything so that the musician would have all the necessities brought to him at his instrument. They brought Fats various dishes, drinks, and many alcoholic beverages. In the breaks between performances, Fats even slept by the forte piano. Alongside the food and drink, Waller was not left without generous monetary compensation. Some sources claim that Al Capone paid the musician $100 in cash for each song he played. 3 days later, the celebration finally came to an end. The very same group of 4 men who had kidnapped Fats brought him back to the car. The car took him back to his hotel, dropped him off, and left. Waller was left exhausted and exceedingly drunk, so his memory of the event was blurry. But the fact that Fats got a couple $1,000s richer over the course of those 3 days in 1927 is confirmed in the biography written by his son. After this incident, the path of Waller and Capone never again crossed. Fats never really got into trouble with the law, and he spent most of his time far from mafia territory. Al Capone, for his part, didn't mingle with the creative circles Fats ran in, so it would have been very unlikely for them to ever meet again. Waller's career and personal life didn't suffer in any way from this incident. He continued to perform and produce new records with various American labels. In the 1930s, Fats went on a grand tour of Great Britain and Ireland. During that period, he managed to write the second of his 2 most famous songs, which were inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame some decades later. The pianist passed away in December 1943, succumbing to pneumonia. Al Capone outlived the musician by only a few years. He continued to lead a life of crime and luxury until 1929. That year, Capone was arrested, after which he frequently fell into the hands of the police. In 1931, the American mafia boss was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years imprisonment. In 1939, he was taken from prison to a psychiatric ward in Baltimore. When his condition deteriorated further, he was allowed to return home. The most well-known gangster of the 20th century spent his last days together with his wife in their home in Miami. He passed away in January of 1947. The story of this strange kidnapping, which connected 2 individuals from very different social circles, remains a puzzle for scholars to this day. Even after all these decades, the authenticity of this event is still disputed by biographers and jazz fans. It's practically impossible to confirm the validity of this story, because the mafia was careful to pay in cash so as not to leave any financial traces of the kidnapping or of their private party. All the witnesses of the event were either members of the criminal underworld or remained silent about the event until the end of their lives. The only source that claims this story actually occurred is the aforementioned biography written by Fats Waller's son Maurice. In 2015, the British radio station BBC became interested in this event. They led an investigation to determine the authenticity of this story. Together with the American jazz musician Kurt Elling, journalists from the BBC made a special documentary program about the incident. Thanks to that radio program, new life has been breathed into this unbelievable story. Do you believe this story? Do you think the hardened mafiosos would just let Waller go after bringing him to Capone's private party? Or is this just another legend from the world of jazz? Tell us what you think in the comments, share this video with your friends, and as always, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click the bell to get notifications when our new videos come out.